Thank you all so much for coming out today. I know it's towards the end of the conference, so it's been a long couple days if you've been doing both. So we're going to be talking about a project that is between the Robert B. Haas Family Arts Library and the Yale Digital Humanities Laboratory, and it is called Ensemble at Yale. So we'll get into that in a moment, but first to introduce ourselves, my name is Alex O'Keefe. I'm the Arts Digital Projects Librarian at the Haas Arts Library.
And my name is Catherine DeRose. I'm the Program Manager of the Digital Humanities Lab.
So the conference is all about networks, and a lot of it has been about the Yale, how we work together, but we're looking at another form of a Yale network, and it's more to do with the history. So Ensemble at Yale is a project that deals with Yale's theater history with Drama 37, which is an archival collection of programs from the Yale School of Drama and the Yale Repertory Theater, dating from 1925, and our project, they go up to 2016, so it's quite a long amount of time that we're covering. And if you don't know a lot about the Yale theater scene, there are a lot of famous alum from the School of Drama, including Meryl Streep, Angela Bassett, Sigourney Weaver, lots of them. I'm not going to try and name them all. So we have quite often questions about people who went to school here and what plays were they in, how many times they perform on certain stages, things like that. And so one thing that we can't do right now is really answer those questions because they're all in an archive, one program at a time, and we don't have a list of like what everyone's been doing and everyone's been up to. So we wanted to increase access to what is a minimally processed archive by library standards, generate a database of Yale theater history, and then also, ultimately for us, answer reference questions. So the project is inspired, though, we can't take full credit. It's inspired by an NYPL, New York Public Library Labs project, just called Ensemble, and that was in 2013. And so when ours launched, we called it Ensemble at Yale to clarify the difference. But the thing that makes these projects special is, if you all know about gathering text from different documents, you can do OCR, which is machine reading, where it just gets all of the text. We didn't want to do that with these programs because there's a lot of text we don't need, especially like advertisements from the 50s about watches. We don't need text from that. But also a more important thing of it is that we wanted to find semantic relationships between person and role. So we want to know if Meryl Streep was in a play, who did she play? Those sorts of relationships are really important, and in terms of the networks we'll talk about too. And it's also hard for computers to see those relationships, and human judgment is extraordinarily important for it with this sort of format and a human understanding of like plays and programs. So the project itself has been going on for quite some time now. It had a lot of background tasks that had to happen before it launched. So they digitized the programs that I was talking about in the archives with student workers' helps in the digital collections at the Arts Library, determining the organization and presentation of the site, all of those sorts of baseline things you have to decide. And then we use a platform called Scribe, which we wanted to customize workflows for theatrical data. So Scribe is to mark and transcribe things in a crowdsourced way, which is what our project does, but there was a lot of customizations that happened before it launched. We learned a lot of lessons from that process, as one does. So we had usability testing before going live, which did happen, but it really helps to make sure that's a priority. Fixing errors and preventing junk data, like that testing of the platform itself, and then how to decide when marking and transcribing is complete. It's kind of a workflow thing we had to determine in the early stages. So it launched in May of 2017, and this is, I'll actually navigate to it in a second. It's a little hard with the dual screens, but it launched, and I'll show you a demo of how it works. No, I won't. What did I do? Is it this one? No, it's not. Oh, okay. So let's try getting out of this.
If you exit full screen, you'll be able to get that.
Sorry?
If you exit full screen.
Oh yeah, there it is. Boop, boop, boop. Okay, sorry everybody, please bear with me for one moment. There we go. Okay, so if you just go to Ensemble, which hopefully I'm typing right. Can you see it, Kathy?
There's an
Ah, I knew it.
at the end. Yeah. Oh, there it is. It preloaded. Yeah.
Okay, I was like, I know you have it on here. Okay, cool. So this is the site, live and in person. So to get started, you log in. We have a lot of different options on how to do that, including your net ID if you're a Yale person. Do you mind if I log in under your account? And then you have two options here, which is marking and transcribing. So the mark workflow is that over here we have all the different things we're looking for, and you can, it's really neat, you can see all of the program one page at a time if you'd like. You can see those fun advertisements I was talking about. But then we're looking for pages like this, which have the title and other people involved in it. So you can just draw a box around the thing and say done. And then you can keep doing that to completion, or if you're interested in transcribing, this is how transcribing looks. And we have custom boxes for like each type of thing. So if it was a person, it would ask you for their role as well as their name. In this case, it's just the title and possible subtitle. So what an appropriate one, let's do it. I did not plan that. I'm very happy about the serendipity of it. And then you can say, basically, I'm done transcribing and I want to go back. So it's a really cool platform, and through doing this, we have done a lot of programming to get people involved. If I can get back to the presentation, great. So this is in case the website was down for some reason, and it wasn't, hooray. Okay, so then we've had a lot of really fun events that we call transcribe-a-thons and transcribe challenges, where we've had folks come out into our space and the DH Lab space in order to learn how to use the platform and contribute to the project. It's been really fun. We also had a visit to Arts Library Special Collections, so you could see those programs you've been working on live and in person, which was really exciting. And then we have trivia rounds at every single event, where we also do Yale Rep and Yale School of Drama specialized trivia written by our expert drama librarian. And so we have a lot of ways that we ask people to get involved, and in so doing, we've gathered quite a lot of data. If you might have noticed, we have the platform organized into 6 eras. We have finished the first era. It's extraordinarily exciting. 1 of 6 is done. That's over 200 programs of data. And so now we have to think about what we're doing with that. So I am in the process of cleaning it, and we have steps to get through it all. So initial cleaning, using open or fine, removing duplicate values because multiple people can transcribe the same program in Excel. Checking the program. We right now are training student workers to help with this step because we want to make sure, we are trying to make the cleanest data set possible. So there's a lot of steps in this to make sure that like essentially any errors are caught along the way. And then normalization to improve searchability, because ultimately we want to upload this data into Find It. And then we also want to have an interoperable data set that people can access. We're still determining what that's going to look like and how much linked open data practice we can or can't use. So we're normalizing names using, right now, we're just kind of homebrewing it close to Library of Congress standards, but we haven't had a chance to start cross-referencing. And then roles we're using, Australia Stage has a set of terms to use. And so we're normalizing everything so that researchers could say, in case they're interested in, like, I want to know everyone who ever did X staff role, you could look that up kind of thing. Because the fun thing with historical programs is semantics change over time, so people's titles change over time. As you can imagine, from 1925, those titles are not the same as 2018. So these are the sorts of steps we're taking to try and maximize our data for researchers ultimately, because that's what this project is for. And then we have a final check process where we check the data against itself and make sure everything looks good. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kathy.
Oh, thank you, Alex. So this is an interface of one of the tools that Alex has been using and I've been using when we're thinking about cleaning the data. It's called Open Refine. It's free. It's open source. But what's really nice is it'll ingest a spreadsheet that you want to give it, and it'll give you ways to filter down and actually see specific categories in kind of clusters. So for an example of that, this is one where I've asked it to look at our people names column and see if there were some that it thought should be clustered together that are currently separated. So this is where it's catching a lot of that name normalization that Alex was mentioning, where these names look identical, it's just that somebody put a comma before junior when they were transcribing it on one program, and in the other program there wasn't a comma. And so to the computer, those are actually different things because that missing comma actually matters. But to us, we want to treat those as the same person that we know they are. And so this is the step that Alex has been doing a lot of the work towards reconciling these slight differences in names and having to identify, at one point an actor might use their middle initial, and the next year they might decide not to. And so having to figure out, like, are these the same people, so that way we're not double counting them when we actually go to visualize them as a network graph. So that's one part of the cleanup. The other part of the cleanup is actually getting the data into a format that's amenable to creating a network graph. So for just a little terminology, for network graphs, networks are studies, they're visualizations of the relationships between things and how those things are connected. Things in this case for the ensemble network are going to be people, and the thing that's connecting them is whether or not they were in the same performance together in some way, whether that was as a staff member or as an actor or as the director. And so while we have all that information in these spreadsheets, in order to create it as a network graph, we actually need to present it in two separate spreadsheets. We need to have one that's called a node table, and nodes are your things. So in this case, it's going to be our people category. And so we'll have a unique ID column so that we don't lose all that wonderful work that Alex is doing for the name normalization. If there were two Meryl Streeps, if another one comes around, we want to be able to differentiate them. And in addition to that, in addition to their name, we want to have what their role was. Were they a cast member? Were they a director? We want to capture that information. So we have that in our node list. And then we also have what's called an edge list or an edge table. And the edge is the word that people use to describe relationships in a network. Or depending where, what field you're coming from, you might hear link or tie is another phrase that people use. And so in this case, our edges is going to be two people that are connected to one another and the play that's connecting them and the year that that play took place. So that way, if we have repeat performances, we can clearly separate those out in the network graph that we're going to produce. And so these are just a couple snapshots on some Python scripts we wrote to help automate some of that work of the network creation. And what we actually get is something that looks like this when we run it. This is your classic hairball example in networks. Alex and I think it looks a bit like a Rorschach test. Yeah. So I see like a lung and a heart. Alex saw something very different. But in either case, what we're not seeing is like a really nuanced pattern that gives us a sense for what's happening in the network. And that's partly because it's so large. So when even this is just a subset that we're working with right now, and it's already 991 nodes. So there are 991 people in this network.
And it's 52 plays.
52 plays.
So this is only 52 plays when I was saying there's over 900 programs total going to happen eventually. So this is a small portion.
In the edges, the connections of people in these plays are over 23,000. And so seeing it all in mass is kind of hard to figure out, like more than a general sense of there seem to be some large clusters. But we need to actually delve into it and experiment with it a little bit to tease out some more meaningful patterns. And so what I'm going to show now are a few different ways that we've started teasing that out. So one of the things we can adjust is the layout. With network graphs, layout is semi-arbitrary. You could move a node, which is represented as a circle, a person here, into any place on the map that you want. So what doesn't matter is like if two nodes look like they're close to each other on the layout, what matters is if there's that line, the edge connecting them. But since networks, then since layout is flexible, it means we can manipulate it a few different ways and see if we can find any patterns that emerge. So what we've run with these examples are two different force-directed algorithms. And essentially what they're both doing is they're turning the network into a magnetic field so that the nodes repel one another, but the edges act like springs that try and keep things kind of close together. And the reason they have different layouts is because they've, the way when they transform it into a magnetic field, they score things slightly different. And that's helpful in our purposes because they point out different patterns. They're both kind of statistically valid ways of representing the network, but they're useful in different ways. So for the Force Atlas 2 algorithm, it's really helpful for finding what are called brokers in the network. So the people who connect otherwise disconnected subgroups in the network. So these are the people like, you might see this like orange circle here is connecting this group and that group together. Is also connecting this group. And so by stretching it out, we're able to see who are those people who are really functioning as like the connector from otherwise disparate groups. Whereas the Fruchterman Rheingold layout is doing a nice job for showing some of that clustering in a little more detail, where we can see like where the really dense clusters are. There's a lot of people starring in something together. And then we can see kind of peripheral connections of people who might have just been in one performance with that otherwise really densely connected group. And so part of our work over the next few months is going to be really diving into like these relationships. And in addition to layout, another way that we can work with this is through affecting color. So we've rendered it in two different ways right now. The one on the left is using that information from our node list that we captured of whether somebody was a cast member, a staff member, a director, or a playwright. And the category multiple there means that they have been in multiple plays where they've had like an equal number of like times that they were a cast member and equal number of times that they were a staff member. So we really couldn't categorize them as one or the other since they really play both equally. And there's ways that we might refine our categories moving forward. But for right now, that's one way that we've rendered how people were involved in the plays. And that gives you a nice glance of like, well, yeah, we can see that there are a lot more cast members than others, not surprisingly. And staff members are also really densely populated. And one of the things that was interesting to us too, looking at that one on the left, as well as kind of in the Force Atlas 2 one, is that we were surprised at the role directors were playing. When we were originally talking about what we might see, we were thinking that it would be staff members who would be the people connecting the network, because staff members would go on to be involved in many shows. But it turns out that it was returning actors were really important for connecting performances across time, whereas staff maybe have a deeper role in creating connections for like a more condensed time periods. Like in the 50s, it might have been staff members who were really making the connections. But if you want connections between the 1950s plays and the 1940 plays, it might be the director who's actually making the connection. And then the other way that we've experimented with color is with Modularity Class. So that is an algorithm it's a community detection algorithm, so it's trying to find subgroupings within the network. And so as Alex said, we have over 50 plays, just over 50 programs that are part of this. But what the computer found is 10 groupings. So the computer thinks there's only 10 groups in here. And so that suggests to us that, again, we have people who are in repeat performances to such a degree that they have formed kind of their own subnetwork. The way that Modularity Class works is it looks to see that there are more connections within the group than without the group. And this is an algorithm, all these have been generated in a program called Gephi, which is also free open source software for creating networks. Another experiment that we've run is with size. So these are two metrics that are trying to capture a node's importance, and they're doing it in slightly different ways. So betweenist centrality is looking for how often is a node on the shortest path to any other node in the network. So that tends to be somebody who's really connected with a diverse group. So a good example of betweenist centrality for travel is Chicago's O'Hare Airport has a high betweenist centrality for travel in the US. If you're trying to get across the country, you might have to go through O'Hare. You certainly have to go through O'Hare more than you might have to go through somewhere in Florida, for instance, if you're trying to get across the country. So that's roughly how betweenist centrality is working. But one of the things that we're going to have to think about is betweenist centrality doesn't always work well at scale, because it'll start to distort in various ways, versus something like eigenvector centrality, which is also trying to measure a node's importance, but it's more the it crowd kind of measure, where it's looking at this person is connected to other people who are really connected, versus this person's connected to somebody who only has one other connection. And so the bigger a node is, the more, in theory, according to the algorithm, the more influence that person has in communication in the network. And so what we can see by comparing these is we see slightly different patterns. So whoever this person is in blue still has a decent betweenist centrality, but really it's the person in this seafoamy green color here who has a higher betweenist centrality, but they're not very important according to the eigenvector centrality. And all of this is, we're humanities people. We're not going to rely on the statistics as this is an answer to something. But what it is it's a prompting to us to say well, who are these people? Can we go back and look at their connections? The computer thinks there's something interesting there. Do we think there's something interesting there? And so it's more of a visual cue for us about how we might dive into this otherwise really large and kind of unmanageable network. And then two more ways that we've experimented with it. One is across time. So we wanted to see how do the connections change over the period that we have as our subset, which is 1925 to 1952. And so what this is showing us, again, is just those connections forming over time, but it suggests that the modularity color scheme that we were using is actually really good at telling us when people were performing. It seems to be capturing kind of decade or sub-decade information. There's your 1950 cluster over there, or 1920 cluster over there, starting to move into later 1920s, 1930s at the bottom here, 1940s, earlier 1940s and the 1950s. And why that is useful is that, again, gives us some different ways of thinking about the 1920s, that blue and black cluster over there, that's massive, and it's really densely connected in a way that the 1950s isn't. And so does that mean, were the programs different back then? Were they just smaller casts in the 1950s compared to the 1920s? Were there just people like in repeat performances more? Was that a custom in the 1920s that like drops off in the 1950s? Again, it doesn't give us an answer, but it gives us a way to ask questions of the data set that we can go back to and use our traditional humanities methods to delve into more. And then the last thing that we've been experimenting with is partitioning the network. And so that's pulling out specific subsets that we want to look at more closely. And so I've put up just 5 of the ones here. So we have all of our cast members over there, directors in the middle, and then staff. And then I pulled out 2 of the modularity groups that, according to the eigenvector centrality, seemed really important. And what's useful here is, again, it gives us a sense of like, casts are really densely connected, but particularly in this cluster, like why are these casts not quite as densely connected? Like we might go and look at who are those people, what performances were they're in, is that time, are we seeing the time difference? Like are these all the 1950s cast members and these are the 1920s? For directors, what we loved about it is we're like, oh, we didn't expect to see directors really connected to each other at all. But it turns out that sometimes directors would return and actually star as a cast member in like a fellow director's performance. And so this showed something to us that we wouldn't have thought to ask of the data set, like are directors ever cast members? But they were. And then again, staff, like we can start to look at how they're connected and how they might differ from the connections of staff members. And similarly for modularity scores, again, it just gives us a way of delving into these subgroups, which we now know, thanks to the time slider, seem to be roughly correlated with the performance date. And then for the last slide that I'll show is this one that actually answers the question that Alex had started with. So one of the original aims for the project was Lindsay King, the Associate Director in the Arts Library, often gets the question, I want to know what this person starred in, I want to know who they starred with, I want to know what their role was, I want to know their years at Yale, all these things that were answers that we didn't have to hand already. Now we can start to answer those questions both from the spreadsheet but also in an interactive way where we can see, like, so Sarah Sigler, she's light blue because she's in that multiple category, meaning in this case she was both a staff member in a play in 1946 and then she was a cast member in a play in 1947. We can see what those plays were. We can see who else was with her in those plays. If we discovered somebody of interest, like if the person who's like, I want to know about Sarah Sigler, also wants to know about whoever this person is, they can now see their network very quickly as well without having to go back to the archive and do a ton more research to kind of tease out these patterns. They're now more easily accessible for people to play around with. And so that's very exciting to us because it suggests that this is going to be a good way moving forward once we get all of the data in, but we're still going to have to tease out like how, like if it's already that dense of a network with just the subset that we're working with, how are we going to scale it up to be able to visualize it more? And so this is just our thank you slide, but then we also have, if you're interested, we also could show you the live Gephi network. We have that running on the machine. But otherwise, we're happy to take questions. Thank you so much.
So I'm doing it while we're talking.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Yes. That's what I want to hear. Okay.
It can be like really therapeutic too,
Yeah.
like just kind of like to go one by one.
I just, we're sitting here talking about, look at this. It's a little addictive.
Yes.
Good.
That's the goal.
No, really, I need to pay attention.
Yeah.
And then we have, like I said, those really fun events called Transcribe-a-thons. We're kind of introducing some new stuff in the fall. So if you want to get on our email list, just let me know and we send you info about it. But it's opportunities for people to come together and do this work together because as fun as it is, it's working isolated, it just kind of gets old. And so we all come together and we're like, oh my God, listen to this name. This is a weird name. Oh my God, this play. I never thought this play would be happening. So yeah, so it's really fun.
Well, my daughter is actually studying theater at ECA right now.
Oh, fantastic.
And I'm thinking this would be really cool to do with her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is a great.
Well, it's a longer term goal, but something that's on our mind too is now once we have this network created, there are, records of Broadway plays and where people have started, and can we see some connections if we sync our data up with Broadway's data set and starting to see who went on from Yale to do other things.
So we're trying to set some precedent with how we're handling our project and approaching it, but also how we're cleaning the data, in the hopes that other people will take on the mantle with their archives or collections and start doing similar work. And then the more we do it and the less siloed it is, the more opportunities there are to like explore these connections. Yeah.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
Oh, I think it's awesome.
It's fun.
Great, we're so thrilled to hear you like it. That's great.
But can I now, like, so if I've only done part of it, and if I need to leave, will somebody pick up where I left off?
Yes.
So yes,
Currently.
while we're on Scribe, I was going to say. So we might be switching engines. We're working on it this summer, but right now the answer is yes. So you can come and go as you please, essentially.
Okay.
And our newer one, it's going to be a little bit different of a workflow, and it will be you have to do something to completion, but it won't. It'll be clear that that's how it works, essentially. So when that change happens, you'll know it if you've been playing on the platform this whole time.
Right.
But for now, yeah, you can totally drop in and out as much as you feel like.
And one of the great things, one of the reasons too that we're switching to the new platform is it's actually going to let you see all the things that you've contributed to. So you'll see like, I've transcribed like 30 programs or
Yeah,
something.
and it's really fun too because you can make your own custom collection.
Yeah.
So if you found something you really like, you can like favorite it essentially, and you can explore it. And then we'll also have like a chat board. So there's a lot of new features that'll get people able to engage in new ways.
So when I come back on, this unfinished playbill is what I'm going to be working on?
Not
or
necessarily.
somebody else will do that?
Yeah, if you're doing just the mark and transcribe, like top key buttons,
Yeah.
it'll just dump you into something the program has decided is important.
Right.
So you may or may not hit the same one twice. And so there's one way to navigate on the era page where you have a little bit more control if you like really care to do a program all the way through. So if we go back to the home page and scroll down. So these are the eras I was talking about. This is the one that's done now, so you can't transcribe anything in that era because it's done, which is, again, very exciting. Yeah, so if you click on any of them that suit your fancy, you'll see all the playbills from that era, which is really cool, and then it has the mark and transcribe when you hover over any playbill. The thing I will say is it moves them at, like almost every time you get back on. So so that's where the findability can be a little difficult if you're trying to do repeat things. But if you are like, I really do just want to work on something specific, you can go through this way on this platform. And again, later we'll be changing that. It'll be totally random. There won't be that control. But for now, you'll have this ability to kind of pick and choose.
And even when we switch over to the new platform for the transcriptions, this will sort of become an archival site where you'll still be able to browse the programs if you wanted to do that too.
Yeah, so until they're in Find It, we don't want to like deprive people of this cool tool we've made to explore. And so what'll happen is on the new platform, there'll be metadata that you could filter this to find something on here if you really just want a view-only version of it. Or again, you can favorite it on the platform and all this other stuff. So there's a lot of cool features on the way.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is neat.
It's a fun project. It's also really fun just to look at how things have changed over time. And since I am like not even neck deep, I'm like this deep in the data at this point. You know, I made a lot of, it's fun in that I made a lot of assumptions about things from looking at names over and over again. And then as soon as we made the network chart, Kathy knows, because I was like, wait, what? I didn't expect that at all. Wait, what? And it's just this really cool way to like re-visualize and rethink about it, even after I've been looking at it literally for weeks, right? So, yeah. And then I think we should show them the
Sure.
Gephi thing. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, so if I go.
So all of those screen grabs Kathy was showing you on Gephi, if you ever get the chance to play with it or use it or are interested in network graphing, it's a lot more interactive. So all those things Kathy was talking about where she can make changes or move things around, this is what it would look like in the program. So anytime you hover, you see the name and the plays, and you can zoom in. Make those algorithmic changes that Kathy was talking about. So it's really fun to play with. And we're hoping eventually, we haven't figured out what it's going to look like, but some sort of public data visualization for people to have these sorts of experiences with. The DH Lab is we're trying to think through ways to make that work. But for now, any individual researcher, once the data is available, could do this themselves. Possibly with some training, of course, but still, yeah. So this is a really cool way to think about it and look at it.
And what's nice is, so a lot of the algorithms that I was showing, those are things that Gephi provides in the statistics pane here. But like role majority, that was something we had in our spreadsheet. So any additional information we capture about the performances or about the people are things that we can then filter by or color code by later on. So lots of options.
Yes, and we've again tried to make the data in such a way that researchers have those options available. And we also are trying to keep the original entries because we ask people to type exactly what they see. So if you were interested in the different ways Frank McMullen spelled his name, you would have an ability to find that out. Or if you were interested in how titles of cast and staff have evolved over time, you would be able to explore that. So if you were like when did production manager become stage manager, or these sorts of connections. Dramaturgs who are drama historians are more interested in those things, but we're trying to think about our audience and who will be using it. So it's really fun.
Did you guys organize your eras based on the directors? And if so, what was the reasoning behind sort of naming the eras after the person?
So I wasn't there for the beginning organization, I should say before I start talking, but my understanding is that these things are all in an archive just chronologically, so there really wasn't subsets. And thinking about potential users and people interested in this, a lot of thought went into alumni and how they might want to see things they were in or their friends were in, and work on those programs specifically. So they were trying to think of a way to organize them in smaller subsets. And I know they landed on this option after a lot of different talk and discussion of ways that could happen. So instead of making it arbitrary and saying every 25-year chunk or something like that, they wanted to have some sort of meaning as to, like, until 1966, though there's not a name because these two eras don't have the same, again, you can think about the history and how things change and how we think about programs within a larger theater network over time.
So for the founding era and the Department of Drama, there obviously was someone at the helm of the organization.
Right.
It was just obviously a lot of things changed. Maybe they were combined with other schools, whatever.
Yeah.
So how did you guys name Department of Drama founding era, since those are kind of separate from the directors' names?
So that's where we do have some sub information on each era to essentially explain it. So this one is, Department of Drama essentially existed before Yale Rep existed, and so that's where Department of Drama is by itself because this is when that started. And then when Yale Rep starts is I can't remember founding era because I am not a drama historian. Yeah, so this is when it starts having a separate Master of Fine Art. They change in some way,
Yeah.
and then Yale Rep with their directors comes in and affects the rest of the groups. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for the question. And if I ever don't answer something to satisfaction, just let me know. I'm happy to follow up with more robust responses.
Yeah, as we said, and as hopefully it was clear in our last slide, we have a big team that's working on this.
And a big team that has been working on it over time. So I'm newer to the project in the large scheme of our timetable. Good.
That's great, yes.
I'm so happy to hear it.
Thank you so much. We're happy to follow up with anyone too over email or things. If you have any questions.